In a time after the gods had carved out Olympus and the Titans had faded into shadow, a new question stirred in the halls of divinity. A question not of thunder or fate, but of shape and soul. Who would walk the earth now? Not spirits, not beasts, something different, something that could dream. Long before humanity learned the art of fire or the weight of love, the world was already spinning. Mountains had risen and oceans whispered their secrets. The gods had chosen their thrones and etched their powers into the bones of the cosmos. But below Olympus, the world remained silent. Beautiful, yes, forests bloomed and rivers ran wild, but something was missing. Prometheus saw this silence and felt it gnaw at him. Unlike his brother Prometheus, who moved through creation with cheerful impulse, Prometheus moved with thought, slow, deliberate, dangerous thought. He was a titan, born of the old order, yet not loyal to its cold pride. Where the old gods saw mortals as fleeting sparks, Prometheus imagined something brighter, a flame that might persist. When Zeus granted the task of populating the world with creatures, it was Prometheus who stepped forward first. With playful energy, he handed out traits to every animal: feathers to birds, strength to lions, cunning to foxes, shells to turtles. He was generous, too generous. By the time he reached mankind, there was nothing left. No fangs, no fur, no wings, no claws. Man stood bare under the sky, fragile and forgotten. Prometheus watched and frowned. He saw the vulnerability in this upright creature, the way it shook beneath the cold stars, the way its eyes looked up, not just with fear, but with wonder. And something stirred in him. Not pity, not yet. Something more dangerous. Admiration. He descended to earth, in secret. With his hands, he shaped the first humans from clay. Soft at first, drying under the sun, given structure by intention. He didn't need Zeus's approval. He needed only the silence of Olympus to look the other way. Into this clay, he breathed not just life, but potential. The capacity to think, to create, to question. A spark of the divine. It was not allowed. It was done. But even with this shaping, mankind remained vulnerable. They could think yes, but they shivered in the night and starved in the cold. And so Prometheus broke Olympus's law again. He stole fire. From the chariot of Helios or the forge of Hephaestus, tales vary, but the theft is never in doubt. He hid it in a hollow fennel stalk, a humble vessel for a holy crime, and brought it to earth. When he placed the flame into human hands, their world changed. They cooked food, they forged tools, they gathered, built, sang. With fire, they mastered night. With fire, they became dangerous. Zeus saw the flicker from Olympus and knew. His wrath was immediate, but not loud, not yet. There would be no thunderbolt, not this time. Zeus wanted Prometheus to feel the weight of his rebellion, to understand that cleverness had its cost. But first came a warning, not to Prometheus, but to humanity. Hephaestus, reluctant but obedient, shaped a woman from clay, more beautiful than anything Prometheus had made. The gods gifted her with traits both radiant and treacherous. Aphrodite gave beauty, Hermes gave cunning, Athena gave craft. Her name was Pandora. She was offered to mankind as a gift. But gifts from Olympus rarely come without purpose. She carried a jar, not a box, as later tales would have it, sealed tight and forbidden to open. Curiosity, one of Hermes' last-minute additions to her soul, would not be denied. She opened it, and from it spilled every sorrow the world had never known: pain, disease, famine, betrayal. They rushed into the air, invisible and unstoppable. Only one thing remained at the bottom: Elpis. Hope. It clung to the edge of the jar, trembling. Some say she shut the lid just in time, trapping it inside. Others say it escaped too, slower than the others, but strong. Either way, hope remained, damaged maybe, but alive. Meanwhile, Prometheus was taken. Zeus did not kill him. No, he chained him to a rock in the wild Caucasus Mountains, where the sky was cruel and the air thin. Every day, an eagle, sacred to Zeus, descended upon him and tore at his immortal liver. Every night, it grew back. Immortality is a strange gift. He screamed. He endured. He did not regret. Humanity, born from clay and fire and disobedience, flourished below. They remembered Prometheus not as a fool, but as a father. The fire in their hearths was his whisper, his defiance burning quietly through generations. On Olympus, Zeus watched, not pleased, not defeated, just waiting. And so the balance was struck. Mankind rose, gods grew wary, and the Titan who had shaped both clay and fate remained in chains. Watching the world he had made stumble, rise, and stumble again. The mountain winds howled where Prometheus lay in torment, but the world below no longer echoed with emptiness. Humanity, once helpless and cold, had learned to stand tall. Villages rose from the earth, fires glowed like stars on the land, and language bloomed, first as gestures, then as words. And still, the memory of Prometheus persisted, like an ember that refused to die. Though the gods had punished him, they did not turn their backs entirely. Some watched with curiosity, others with caution. Athena, goddess of wisdom, observed humanity's rise with a quiet pride, perhaps seeing echoes of herself in their pursuit of knowledge. Hermes found amusement in their cleverness, in the way they lied to each other, negotiated, tricked, and traded. Even Artemis, who preferred the company of wild things, could not help but notice the flickering brilliance in mortal hearts. But Zeus brooded. He saw a future that twisted out of his control. Mortals, once insignificant, had become players in fate. With fire in hand and thoughts in mind, they no longer relied entirely on the gods. They feared, yes, they prayed, but they also dreamed, planned, invented. They asked questions. Why do we suffer? Where do we come from? Who holds the thunder? And worst of all, could they be more than they were? Zeus feared rebellion, not in Olympus, but on earth. And so he sent warnings. Storms struck without cause. Crops failed. Rivers overflowed their banks. Oracles spoke in riddles, heavy with dread. Do not rise too high, they said. Do not climb the mountain of knowledge. Do not forget who rules the sky. But humanity had already changed. They learned medicine. They built tools. They sculpted images of gods and heroes, imagining themselves reflected in the divine. They learned to write, to pass knowledge through generations, turning moments into stories, stories into legacy. And still, above all, they remembered Prometheus. The Titan's agony did not go unnoticed by the immortals. Many a god passed by the Caucasus cliffs and turned their face. The punishment was harsh, perhaps too harsh, but none dared challenge Zeus. None except Herakles. It was many generations later. Mankind had birthed legends of their own by then. Heroes stronger than men, touched by the divine, caught between Olympus and earth. Herakles, son of Zeus, and the mortal Alcmene, was one such soul. He was known for strength, for wildness, for fury and redemption. And in the course of his 12 labors, he came upon the chained Titan. Prometheus, weary beyond words, looked upon Herakles not as a god, not as a man, but as both, A bridge. Herakles saw the eagle first. It swooped down as it always had, talons glinting, screech echoing across the crags. But Herakles was no passive witness. With bow drawn, he fired a single arrow. The eagle fell, lifeless, for the first time in centuries. The chains, forged by Hephaestus himself, resisted. But Herakles strained against them, his muscles singing with the burden of legacy. With a great cry, he broke them. Prometheus collapsed to the ground. The sky did not crack. No lightning came. Zeus, distant and silent, did not interfere. It was not forgiveness. It was recognition. Zeus had grown wiser. Time and rule had taught him that power did not only come from fear. Sometimes it came from balance, from allowing others to rise so long as Olympus remained above. Prometheus was free. He did not return to Olympus. He wandered, a titan without a throne, a god without worshippers. Yet everywhere he walked, fire greeted him. In every hearth, every forge, every story told around flames, his gift flickered. Back among mortals, tales of Pandora's jar spread, shifting and evolving. Some blamed her for all the world's pain. Others pitied her, seeing her not as a villain, but as a vessel, manipulated by gods, driven by curiosity, born from the very spark Prometheus gave to man. And so humanity walked forward, with pain, yes, hunger, war, sorrow, but also with hope. That tiny presence left at the bottom of the jar. Elpis. Its shape remained unclear. Some said it was a spirit, others called it a whisper. But all agreed it was powerful. It did not remove suffering. It only gave meaning to endure it. With Prometheus free and mankind rising, the balance between Olympus and Earth shifted again. Not toward war, not yet, but towards something deeper, a recognition that even clay, when warmed by fire and guided by will, could shape the world. Back on Olympus, the gods debated. Some still saw mankind as a threat. Others were intrigued, but none could deny one simple, quiet truth. The age of mortals had begun. Long after Prometheus's chains were broken, long after the eagle's shadow no longer crossed the mountains, his story became legend. But legends, like fire, pass from hand to hand. They evolve, they warm, they burn. Among the mortals, fireside stories whispered of Prometheus not just as the bringer of flame, but as the first who dared to defy the gods for love of humanity. His name became synonymous with rebellion, but not reckless defiance, rather the rebellion of care, of sacrifice. And that idea, as dangerous as any weapon, seeped into the hearts of humankind. As humanity grew in number and in thought, they began to shape the world in their image. Temples rose, yes, in honor of Zeus, Hera, and the rest, but equally, they carved roads, raised cities, created music. They did not wait for divine instruction. They did not ask permission. The gods watched, some with approval, some with suspicion. Zeus, ever the ruler, ever the strategist, called a council on Olympus. Poseidon stood tall with sea salt still in his beard, unconcerned. "Let them build their little kingdoms," he said. "The tides will outlast their stones." Hera, regal and wary, narrowed her gaze. They challenge the old ways. They offer sacrifices, yes, but they no longer tremble. Athena, patron of wisdom and civilization, spoke with calm clarity. They are not children anymore. They are not gods either, but they are something becoming. Ares grunted. "Let them test their strength. We'll see what they become." But Zeus was silent. He did not speak until the wind had passed through the great marble halls and all eyes had turned to him. "They were clay," he said. "Now they shape clay. They were bare. Now they clothe themselves in thought. Fire changed them. Let us see where it leads. No decree was made that day, no curse, no blessing, only observation. Zeus would not interfere yet, not because he was defeated, but because he was curious. And so humanity expanded. They discovered bronze, then iron. They mapped stars and seasons. They wrote not just prayers, but poetry. They carved myths into stone, stories of gods and titans, of love and vengeance, of fire and flood. In some, Zeus was wise. In others, cruel. In many, Prometheus was a flicker of light in the darkness. One of the most enduring of these tales concerned the torch. It was said that the first flame, the one Prometheus gave, had never truly gone out. It had passed from hand to hand, from the first cook fire to the first forge, from warrior to healer, from parent to child. The tale told of a mountain, not Olympus, but a mortal one, hidden in the east, where a secret fire still burned, untended but eternal. A pilgrimage grew around it. Some said only the worthy could find it. Others said all who sought it would. But what mattered more than the flame was what it meant. A symbol of defiance, yes, but also of promise, that no matter how dark the night, a light could be carried. It was during this age of discovery that mortals began to question the nature of punishment. Prometheus's agony, told in whispers and song, began to feel unjust. Some asked, did he sin or did he save? Was theft a crime when it gave rise to civilization? Philosophers emerged, seekers of truth not from the mouths of priests, but from the workings of reason. They debated Prometheus not as a god, but as a principle. They called him the champion of intellect, the first rebel, the divine liberator. And this idea that mortals could interpret myth on their own marked a quiet revolution. It was no longer enough to fear the gods. Now they questioned them. Why should a creator suffer? Why should a gift be cursed? Why should a god not love the ones he made? These were not prayers. They were thoughts, powerful, contagious, radiant. In temples, priests felt their hold slipping. In Olympus, gods felt their distance widen. Only Athena, wandering sometimes among cities in disguise, smiled at the change. Even Hephaestus, in his forge, began to craft tools not only for gods, but for ideas, devices that mortals might one day understand. Change was a fire of its own, and Prometheus, wandering through time, became more than a figure. He became a shadow behind every innovation, every boundary crossed, every tradition challenged. He no longer needed to speak. His silence was enough, because his presence was felt whenever someone asked, "What if we did not fear?" Or, "What if we dared?" Down in the valleys and up in the cities, humanity began to split. Some clung to old devotions, offering thanks to Olympus, begging for mercy. Others turned their eyes to the earth, the stars, the self. But both groups carried the fire. And that was Prometheus's true legacy. Not rebellion, not flame, but the unshakable belief that within mortal hands could rest something sacred. Beneath the night sky, a child sat beside a dying fire, listening to a grandfather's voice. The stars above shimmered like the embers below, and in their dance was memory of titans, of gods, and of the flame that had never gone out. This, more than temples, more than sacrifice, was immortality. Prometheus had vanished into myth, but his presence remained wherever courage flickered against fear. The world had changed, not overnight, not in thunderclaps, but in countless quiet choices. A plough turning soil, a mother teaching her daughter to write, a physician daring to heal, a philosopher daring to ask. Hope, once a whisper trapped in a jar, had become a wind that moved oceans. Zeus knew this. He watched from Olympus as humanity reshaped the world in fits and starts. There was still worship, but it no longer came from trembling. It came from respect, sometimes from ritual, sometimes from wonder, sometimes not at all. And Zeus, who had once flung lightning with wrath, now weighed his judgments with distance, for Prometheus had changed him too. The story went on, told around fires, in ink, in stone, in dreams. The punishment had become the parable. The theft had become the spark. And the Titan, bound and bleeding, had become the quiet patron of every mortal who dared to reach upward. Yet not all the gods found peace in this new world. Some saw danger. Dionysus warned that unbridled passion could tear civilizations apart. Apollo feared a future where mortals no longer looked to the sun for truth, but only to their own mirrors. Only Athena again stood calm. They must test their own strength, she said. They must learn not because we command it, but because they choose to. The council of gods grew quiet more often than not. Their power had not waned. They were still divine, but the balance had shifted, and that was the heart of the tale. Not a fall, but a balance. Prometheus had not destroyed Olympus. He had reminded it of its limits. The humans had not overthrown the gods. They had become aware of their place in the cosmos. Small, yes, but not powerless. In that understanding came a kind of peace. In time, temples were left behind, replaced by libraries, academies, cities of thought. Some still offered sacrifices, candles, songs, memories, but more often they honored Prometheus not with flame, but with forward motion. Each new invention whispered his name. Each act of empathy echoed his gift. And though the gods still watched, perhaps they no longer watched with fear. Perhaps they too had learned. Prometheus himself, according to some tales, returned not to Olympus, but to the world, disguised, anonymous. In some myths, he became a teacher of astronomy, showing shepherds the movement of stars. In others, a quiet mason who helped build the foundation of a city that would one day write the laws of reason. But in most stories, he simply walked. No followers, no miracles, just steps, one after another, as if reminding mortals that the journey was theirs to make. There is a final tale. It is said that when the last ember of the original fire was about to go out, when no one remained to remember the old gods, a single child, lost in the cold, found it. She held it close, not knowing its history, not fearing its flame. And when she blew on it, gently, hopefully, it came alive again. Not because she was chosen, not because she was powerful, but because she believed it mattered. And that belief, despite the dark, was always the truest fire. So if you hear the story of Prometheus now, let it be not just a tale of pain or punishment or pride. Let it be a story of possibility. That even in a world ruled by thunder, a single spark could change everything. Even clay could defy the heavens. Even fire could be a gift. Even hope could survive the jar. And that, perhaps, is the most divine thing of all.